All right, here we go. My name is Kate Husted, and I'm a clinical herbalist and a writer and a teacher. And I founded a nonprofit organization called the Herb Hut Free Clinic, and we provide free and mobile herbal medicine in La Plata County. And we do free clinics at Mana Soup Kitchen in Durango, at a few mobile home parks in Durango, at Pine River Shares in Bayfield. And you can find information about that. And if you feel moved to donate, you can do that at www.theherbhutfreeclinic.com. And thank you so much for being here tonight. I was invited to give this talk by the Ignacio Public Library on immune system boosting. And obviously, this is an incredibly timely moment to be doing this, not only because COVID cases are rising in our community right now, but also because of the general level of stress that all of us are experiencing collectively, and being in the midst of this pandemic, being in the midst of an election season, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll talk more about the way stress affects our immune system in a little bit. But I just wanted to say thanks for having me to the library, and we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to begin by talking about the immune system in general. And just so we can kind of have a general idea of how things are supposed to work and what things are supposed to look like. So the immune system's job is to determine what is self and what is other, or what is part of our bodies, nourishing our bodies, safe for our bodies, and what is unsafe and outside and needs to be expelled or killed or fought. And when the immune system is deciding what is self and what is other, when it finds something that is other, its job is to attack it and mount some kind of response and get it out of our body somehow. And when these mechanisms kind of go haywire, you see things like allergies and autoimmune disorders. Both of those things are cases of our immune system deciding that something is other when perhaps it's not, or maybe it doesn't need to be. It's viewing something as a threat that maybe doesn't need to be a threat. And that's the case with allergies, like when we breathe pollen in from the air, or maybe we have a food allergy. That's our immune system mounting an inflammatory response to something that it has decided it's afraid of, that it thinks might harm us, whether or not that's actually the case. And in autoimmune disorders, those are cases of our immune system viewing parts of our own bodies as other and mounting an inflammatory response and deciding to attack those. And there's tons of examples of those. And if you're someone who has an autoimmune disorder, a lot of the herbs that we commonly talk about with regards to flu and cold season and getting sick are really strongly immune stimulating, and really amp up our immune response. And those may not be appropriate in cases of folks with autoimmune disorders, and people who say take a fair amount of echinacea or elderberry over time might notice an increase in the symptoms of their autoimmune condition, because their immune system is basically being stimulated and activated, and it's attacking parts of their own body as well as external pathogens and the like. And a lot of the things that we consider symptoms and that we complain about and that we would love to get rid of are really our immune system doing its job. So as some examples, when we encounter, say you are coming down with the common cold and you might develop a head full of mucus and you might develop a cough, and it's through our nose and our mouths that we typically are breathing in airborne pathogens. There we go. I think I had a little technical glitch there for a second, but picking right back up. So we're typically breathing in airborne pathogens through our noses and our mouths. And the mucus that our heads form is our immune system response, and it provides this protective barrier between what's coming in our nostrils and the rest of our bodies. And it also provides a mechanism for pushing out and expelling anything that our mucus might catch coming in. And similar with coughing, our lungs can produce mucus too. And when we cough that up, that's our body's effort to get the gunk in our lungs out and get it out of our bodies. And similarly, when we develop a fever, that's our body's way of heating up to such a degree that it might actually kill invading pathogens. And so all of these things are symptoms of being sick. And our culture's kind of approach to dealing with that is to try to suppress those symptoms so that we can feel better and maybe keep going to work. And when we take an over-the-counter drug that will make us stop coughing, we're bypassing that mechanism that's there for a reason. And the same goes for drugs that clean all the mucus right out of our head or suppress a fever that we have going on. All of these responses are perfectly appropriate and they happen for a reason. And so I like to keep that in mind in my herbal approach to being sick. And I feel like to incorporate this stress piece, we are more susceptible to getting sick when we're stressed. And when all of us know people who can get exposed to the craziest, most gnarly things and not come down with it and not be affected and stay healthy. And we also know people who are getting every single cold that comes by them. If you look at them the wrong way, they're getting sick all winter long. And some of those differences have to do with constitution and genetics. And those things are workable, but they're more, they can be corrected over time in the long term. And such a huge factor of this piece that creates that difference in people that often gets overlooked is stress. And when we get sick, it's often our body's way of forcing us to get the rest that we've been denying ourselves, that we haven't been able to get. And so historically, even though this may sound kind of silly to hear from an herbalist, my approach to realizing that I might be coming down with something, I might be feeling a scratchy throat, is not really to take much if I can avoid it. Sometimes your life is crazy busy. Sometimes it's just not the right time. Sometimes you're an accountant and it's tax season, or you're a single parent with a sick kid at home. And sometimes life has to continue. In those cases, it's absolutely appropriate to pound some really strongly antimicrobial herbs and try to nip whatever you're coming down with in the bud, or stop it in its tracks. But my first choice whenever I can is to kind of clear my schedule if I can and lay down and get the rest that my body's obviously asking for, and of course stay hydrated and support myself. Because when we go through the entire process from start to finish of encountering a pathogen, coming down with something, having our immune system mount this response and create all these symptoms, and then recovering at the other end, we come out so much stronger for it. Our immune system has made new antibodies now, and we've gotten the rest that we need. And so when we do this cultural thing that we love to do by trying to pound a bunch of antimicrobial herbs in the beginning and trying to stop ourselves from getting sick before it happens, we kind of rob ourselves of what's ultimately going to make us stronger. And we actually continue our pattern of being stressed and our immune system being depressed, and it's probably going to end up catching up with us later down the road anyway. So these are all things to keep in mind. Of course, right now we are in the age of COVID, and that's a completely different factor. People with risk factors, it has a much higher death rate. So everything I said does not necessarily apply to you this particular winter. You know, if you feel yourself getting sick this particular winter, probably the very first thing to do would be to start quarantining yourself and going and getting tested and staying quarantined until you know what you have. And once you know what you have, you can decide an appropriate way to respond. Yeah. So about stress and getting sick, I really like to think of this analogy that helps me kind of keep myself in check. And I think of all of us as having a stress bucket and a support bucket associated with our lives and our bodies. And we're all constantly pouring things into both buckets all the time. And so in my support bucket, maybe I am working hard to be diligent about getting enough sleep at night. And I am remembering to stay hydrated. And I might be getting a really balanced variety of plants, veggies, fruits in my diet. I might be eating a lot of soup if it's wintertime, et cetera, taking vitamins, getting regular exercise, all the things we do to support ourselves and our health go in the support bucket. And then in the stress bucket, you know, maybe your work environment is stressful. Of course, right now, all of us are experiencing the collective stress of living in a time of pandemic, the election that we just went through and are still going through, et cetera, et cetera. Not to mention all the regular stress of daily life. You know, maybe you're a parent or all the things that normally stress us out go in the stress bucket. And it's when the stress bucket starts to outweigh the support bucket and the burden here becomes much larger that we get susceptible to succumbing to pathogens that we encounter. And that's why I think that the very most important thing to take away from this class is the things that we do to put weight in our support bucket and balance that back out. And these are not like the sexiest topics in the world. They're things that we all know about, like getting enough sleep, drinking enough water, having a balanced diet, vitamins and minerals if you need them. You know, all the things that we would normally do to mitigate and manage stress in our lives. So regular exercise practice, regular, you know, whatever it is that helps you feel supported and grounded and helps you mitigate the effects of stress, whether that's meditating or drinking a cup of tea every night or going for a 5-minute walk during the day. Somebody who is really diligent and consistent about putting lots of stuff in their support bucket and who barely takes any herbs at all is going to be better off than somebody who's really out of balance this way. Their stress bucket is heavier and they're taking all the herbs. These things are really the foundation of our health and our resilience and our ability to resist going down with some kind of infection. And because times are particularly stressful right now, even more than usual, it can be the absolute hardest time to remember to take time for yourself and remember to do the things. And it can be the hardest time to get regular sleep. And that's okay. If that's the case for you, you're absolutely not alone. All of us are with you, and this is a very human response, to feel overwhelmed and to feel like you have less and less time to care for yourself. And If this is you, I would encourage you to just pick one doable, nourishing thing that you'd like to try to consistently add to your support bucket, and set aside 5 minutes a day for it. That is a great place to start. A lot can be accomplished in 5 minutes a day. And no matter who you are, you have 5 minutes somewhere in your day that you can take just for yourself. So that, I feel like, is the most important part right there. But moving on, some other things that are really important to know about the immune system that really enhance, I think, my life and knowledge of it, that often gets overlooked is the lymphatic system. And a lot of times when I teach classes, people aren't familiar with what the lymphatic system is. So just to briefly go over it, the lymphatic system is a kind of second circulatory system in our bodies, really similar to the one that carries blood all over our bodies in veins and arteries, except the lymphatic system is carrying lymph fluid, and that is a clear fluid. And when you, say, cut yourself and some kind of clear fluid shows up, or that clear fluid, if the cut gets infected, will eventually turn into pus, that is lymph fluid, and it, like blood, travels to absolutely all the tissues all over our bodies, and it is serving multiple purposes. One of them is to collect waste products from various parts of our bodies and deliver them to our bloodstream. So the lymph, when it travels back, it travels towards our heart and dumps any waste products that it picked up along the way into our bloodstream in this special vein right here, kind of by our left clavicle. And then once those waste products get dumped into our blood, the blood carries them to the liver and the kidneys to be detoxified and eliminated from our bodies. So it has a cleaning, cleansing function. And it also, at the same time, is carrying important immune cells all over our body. So it is a delivery mechanism for immune cells. That's why it shows up when you get a cut. It is carrying T cells so that your body can mount an appropriate immune response. It's why when you get sick, you might get swollen lymph nodes. We have lymph nodes distributed all around our bodies that are like kind of epicenters of lymph. And when we are experiencing an infection, especially an internal infection of some kind, the most nearby lymph nodes might get hard and swollen. And that means that they're kind of working overtime. And the lymph system differs from the regular blood circulatory system in that it doesn't have a heart to pump it around the body. And the way that lymph gets delivered and moves around and goes out and comes back is, it happens when we move our bodies physically. And that is the only way that it moves. And this is really, I think, helpful to know because it's such a key component to our overall immune health. And that is why it's so important and nourishing and supportive to get regular movement. And it doesn't have to be extreme crazy movement. If you're not a particularly sporty person, don't fear not. It can be as simple as, if you're somebody, say, who works at your desk all day, getting up once an hour and walking down the hall and back, or across the room and back. Just remembering to kind of regularly keep things moving. If you're somebody who maybe is disabled or unable to move regularly, having somebody else or providing for yourself lymph massage. And this is great for everybody to do, not just the people who don't find it easy to move around. This is something I like to do. My way to remember to do it for myself is that I do it when I'm in the shower. And lymph massage is super simple. All it means is that I'm just applying some light pressure and moving my hands along my body all over. And I like to start out at the far ends of my extremities and move towards my heart always. So I'll come up my back and up my belly and up my legs. Always moving towards my heart, because that is the place ultimately that the waste products that are being carried through the lymph dump into the bloodstream. And that is a lovely ritual that is helpful to the lymph, relaxing to the nervous system, and a great way to spend maybe your 5 minutes a day just caring for yourself and doing something relaxing, and drawing your attention towards yourself and how you're doing. And there are herbs as well that can help facilitate lymph movement. So like I said, your lymph will stagnate and not move without you moving your body. But that said, there are herbs that will help that movement be more efficient and effective when you do move. And some of my favorites for this purpose include burdock. Is a root that grows a bit like a weed here. It's in a lot of people's backyards in our local place. And it's also an herb that, especially at this time of year, you can sometimes find on the shelves in the grocery store. And it is a great food herb. It can also be drunk as a tea or taken in a tincture form. And it's incredibly nutritious. It's got a whole lot of inulin in it, which is a prebiotic. It feeds the good critters that live in our microbiome, which is really important. And it also facilitates lymph movement. So burdock is a super wonderful preventative to add to your life if you feel moved. Calendula is another really commonly available herb that is a great lymph encourager. It is a little yellow flower in the aster family, and it looks kind of like a little marigold. And it is one of my favorite herbs. It has so many varied uses to it, but it really does help us support the immune system in this way. I really like to drink calendula in a tea, and I'll give you guys a favorite tea recipe of mine later that includes calendula in it. We'll also talk about making broths in a little bit, and calendula would be a great addition to broths. Another great herb commonly available, helps move the lymph, is red clover. And this one has a lot of bang for its buck because it's also just incredibly nutritious. It contains a whole lot of vitamins and minerals. And this one is also really excels in a tea or in a broth. It's also just edible. If you have red clover growing in your yard, say, you could pick the flowers and just eat them. And that's always fun. Yeah, and so I'd like to move into more talking about the plant medicine part of this class. And the thing I really want to focus on mainly tonight are the herbs that are really likely to already be in your kitchen. And if they're not already in your kitchen, they should be really accessible and easy to find in most grocery stores. And the reason for that is when COVID first showed up in the United States, all the classic favorites of herbalists that are renowned for being flu fighting just disappeared off the shelves. And it was really hard to get them for months and months. And I feel like we so often have this idea in our heads like, oh, I need the fanciest, most exotic, most hard to get, most expensive herb for this issue because that's going to be the best and the most strong, and it's the one that I need. And I just really want to stress that that is absolutely not the case and that a lot of the stuff that we take for granted and interact with every day is actually incredibly powerful and helpful and meaningful to incorporate into our routines. And that's what I really want to focus on. So let's spend some time talking about kitchen herbs. And the first ones that I think about are onion and garlic. So simple, so incredibly powerful and useful. So onion and garlic are both incredibly antimicrobial. They are stimulating to our blood flow. and they are immune boosting. And just including them in your meals is a great preventative medicine just right there. If you're cooking for yourself, that's great preventative medicine right there. So having onion and garlic around is really helpful. If you get acutely sick this winter, both of these also really shine in acute situations. So if I'm acutely sick, I might chop up garlic super finely as I can. Or if I have a garlic press, I'll put it through the press and then put it in a little bowl. Just cover it with some olive oil. If you feel moved, you can add other spices like sage or thyme or rosemary, and you'll see why later for flavor. But I just use that as a spread, and that's a great way to consume raw garlic. And raw garlic is a really powerful expectorant, so it will help you expectorate mucus that is stagnating in your head. It's incredibly antimicrobial. It will actively fight pathogens that are entering your body. It will help, like I said earlier, warm your body up, stimulate your blood flow. It really gets things moving. If I had an acute cough or someone in the house with an acute cough, I would consider doing an onion poultice. And an onion poultice is such a classic remedy, like probably your grandma used it and it really works. And to make an onion poultice, I would take like 2 medium-sized onions and dice them just as if I was going to eat them, and saute them in some kind of oil, carrier oil, just as if I was going to eat them. And then at the end, I would add some kind of flour, whatever flour you have in your house, whether that's wheat flour or gluten-free flour or cornmeal, just some kind of ground up grain. And the purpose of that is to turn the sauteed onions into a kind of paste that you can spread and that will hold its shape. And then I would find either, if you happen to have some muslin cloth, that's great, or you could use a kind of thin kitchen towel or an old t-shirt, and I would spread whatever fabric it is out on the table and put my onion poultice over on half of it and spread it over half of the cloth, and then fold the other half over the top. And then this is your onion poultice, and you can put it on the bare chest or on the back of whoever is suffering from a cough. And then you can kind of wrap that person in a towel over the top of the poultice and around their body to kind of keep things in place and keep things neat and tidy, and have them sit there for 20 or 30 minutes. And the goal is to have the poultice be warm when it goes on. The heat is part of the medicine, and it shouldn't be so hot that you're burning anybody or that it's painful. But the towel also helps keep that heat in. If you have a hot water bottle in the home, maybe you could put a hot water bottle on top of the poultice and then under the towel, because the heat is a key part here. And that will help somebody's cough be productive. It will help them expel the mucus that's in their lungs and get it out, which we talked about is super important. A lovely, ancient, many times used remedy that we often overlook in modern times, but it's so available to so many of us. Other common kitchen herbs that I really like to turn to, 2 really huge ones are ginger and turmeric. I love to have fresh ginger. A lot of times you can find fresh turmeric too nowadays in the grocery store to have in the house. You can also get these things dried and powdered in your spice kit. They might be sitting there already. You could get the roots chopped up and dried, probably from some kind of herbal medicine source. Those can go in tea when they're prepared that way, when you get the dried root. You can add the powdered ginger and turmeric to your cooking, or the fresh ginger and turmeric to your cooking. You can add them to broths which we'll talk about a little bit later. You can make fancy beverages for yourself with the powdered spices. Golden milk is a favorite. Both of these are incredibly warming, stimulating to blood flow, and specifically immune boosting and immune nourishing. Other spices that are commonly found in our kitchens that kind of fall in that same category of being really warming and stimulating and antimicrobial include clove, cinnamon, nutmeg, cardamom, black pepper. There's a reason that pumpkin spice is a thing this time of year. There's a reason chai lattes are a thing. These things really help nourish our immune system and our overall health and support us in that way. So adding them to your cooking in as many creative ways as you can think of, putting them in soups, putting them in the dishes that you prepare, drinking those beverages like pumpkin spice whatever, or lattes, chai lattes I mean. I personally like to mix a little combination of those powdered spices and add them to my hot cocoa and drink that hot cocoa all winter. I'm a total fan of chocolate. It's a great way to incentivize myself to get my medicine, and it tastes delicious. You can create mulled wine as a traditional beverage this time of year and includes a lot of those spices steeped in the wine. You can do all sorts of creative things. Another kind of category of common kitchen spices that I think about a lot for this time of year are rosemary, thyme, sage, oregano. These things, especially the sage and the oregano and the thyme, really have an affinity for the lungs. So they will help us, again, expectorate and assist in our coughing process as we're going through it. All of these are, again, incredibly antimicrobial. They are all lovely in teas. You can literally just, if you have the spice jar on your shelf, you can literally just throw about a tablespoon into a cup and pour boiling water over it and let it steep for 15 minutes. And that's a medicinal tea right there. So if you're working preventatively, if somebody's actively sick, all of these herbs are wonderful in tea this way. You can brew a tea exactly in the way I just explained and add salt to it and create a gargle. Somebody has a sore throat. It's an incredible gargle that way and really antimicrobial, like I said. You can also, probably one of my favorite ways to use these herbs is in an herbal steam. And if you don't know what that is, I would create one by getting about a handful of whatever herbs I just mentioned, any combination. And actually, in this case of an herbal steam, a really nice addition can also be pine needles. That's another one that's in a whole lot of our backyards in this place in the country and is incredibly accessible and available and abundant out there to be harvested. And you might consider adding pine needles to your herbal steam. I would throw my handful of herbs in a bowl. I would pour boiling water over the herbs, and then I would rest the bowl in my lap and cover myself and the bowl with a towel so that I'm like creating a little tent with my head. And then my only job is to breathe in the steam, all of the aromatic essential oils that are being evaporated out of those plants by the hot water. You're breathing all of those in. They're incredibly antimicrobial. They will help expectorate mucus, whether that's in your sinuses or in your lungs. And it's not to mention like such a stress relief practice. It's great preventatively if you maybe had to go into a high-risk situation that day, where you were coming into contact with a lot of people, or you had a situation where you couldn't appropriately social distance or something like that. If you had something go on that you were worried about, you could totally use an herbal steam as a preventative. Or it's also of course, incredibly useful for acute stuff where there's mucus or coughing. And like I said, it can be really nice. Like here we are going into the holidays, and a lot of times, maybe not so much this year, maybe people aren't traveling and interacting with their families as much this year. But if you are and you're getting overwhelmed by being around family members or something like that, creating the literal tent that is the steam around yourself is like such a nice way to just take a moment for yourself and remove yourself from the hecticness of whatever's going on around you. I really highly recommend this practice. It's gorgeous. And, you know, if you're using it for stress relief, you could get creative and add all sorts of different kinds of herbs, anything that smells good to you, like lavender or rose petals or chamomile, all make really lovely additions to that practice. So yay for herbal steaming. Oh, and one other thing I really love to do with rosemary, thyme, sage specifically, these all serve really well if you have access to the fresh plant, or you can find the fresh plant in a grocery store. Bundling them together, tying them with some string, and burning them. The smoke is antimicrobial. It's a great preventative measure in your house. Breathing in the smoke has all the same medicinal benefits that we've been talking about. It actually literally serves to purify the air in your home. It's a great preventative measure, especially in these times of COVID. Back in old-timey French hospitals, before there even was germ theory, it was common practice to burn sage and rosemary, at least those two and maybe others, in the hospitals. And they didn't even realize it, but they probably actually were killing germs and helping prevent the spread of airborne diseases that way. And they knew they were cleaning the air, they just didn't know the mechanism for it. So that's something that we can use today too. That's wonderful for that. Broths are such a huge asset at this time of year, and you can make your own broths if you feel moved and inspired to do that, or you can buy, you know, a quart of good quality broth on the shelf in the grocery store too, and all of that is good. All of it works. Whatever feels good and realistic to you and that you might actually do are the things to do. And I really like to infuse my broths with herbs. I personally make a bone broth. If you're a vegetarian, you can make a veggie broth. If you're making a veggie broth, some typical bases for the veggie broth include onion and garlic, which I would put in a bone broth as well. So pretty much any broth I'm going to make, I'm going to put onion, garlic, maybe ginger if I want that kind of flavor. Maybe some carrots or some other root vegetables like parsnips or turnips. Celery root is a classic. Burdock root, which you can find in the grocery store right now, is a great addition to broths. Another root that's a little bit more specific to herbal medicine is astragalus. And astragalus is incredibly helpful to the immune system. It's particularly helpful to that person who does end up getting sick over and over and is kind of has a chronically depressed immune system, or maybe an elderly person. Astragalus makes a great preventative. I've also seen it used in acute situations of COVID, and it makes a great broth addition. You usually find the herb sliced, or the root sliced thin and dried at wherever you would go to buy herbs. What else? I really like to put herbs that are super chock full of vitamins and minerals in my broths. So in that category, I think of stinging nettles, dried stinging nettles. Oat straw, red clover again is another one full of vitamins and minerals. Alfalfa, raspberry leaf. These, you know, when I combine all of these, I kind of think of it as taking an herbal multivitamin. They have a lot of micronutrients in them, and the vitamins and minerals are extracted really well into water. So they can also make a great tea. You know, you could just brew a tea with all of those things. And if I was going to make them into a tea, the way I would do it would be to combine all my herbs, grab about a handful, a small handful, throw them into a quart jar and cover them with boiling water, cover the quart jar with a lid, and then let it sit overnight. And the reason I let it sit so long is because the longer you let it sit, the more vitamins and minerals are getting extracted into the water. And then in the morning, I'll come by, strain the dried herb parts out, store my jar in the refrigerator, and just come by and drink 2 cups a day or so of that. And that is a great source of vitamins and minerals. It's a great regular thing to put in your support bucket. It's a great thing to put in your broths too. Other things that are awesome in broths include any of the spices we've already talked about, obviously, and also mushrooms. We haven't talked about mushrooms yet, and mushrooms are kind of like such a hero for the immune system. Ones that are generally more accessible to find in the grocery store include shiitakes. You might also be able to find dried turkey tails sometimes, which are awesome for the immune system. Maitake mushrooms, if you feel like getting a little bit more herbal medicine specific. Reishi mushroom is a really incredible immune system preventer. It's not something that I would necessarily take if I had an acute illness, and that's just because it's a traditional Chinese herb, and in traditional Chinese medicine, they didn't use it that way. They warned against using it if you had an acute illness at the time. But as a preventative, it's amazing. If you are going to go further afield and look for mushrooms that might not be easily found in the grocery store, I really highly recommend this company called Mushroom Harvest. And they sell dried and powdered mushrooms, and they grow all their own organically. So these aren't being over harvested from the wild, which is a concern for some of them for sure. And then they steam treat them, because a lot of times the medicinal value in a mushroom is not going to be released and become bioavailable to your body unless it's been heated up. So they'll steam treat their mushrooms and then they'll dry them. So by the time it comes to you in the dried powder, you can know that it's ethically sourced and that it's going to be bioavailable to you. Mushroom powders in this form is another thing I really like to add to hot cocoa if you feel inspired. Great way to take your medicine. So, you know, any kind of, you know, back to the accessible part, any kind of mushroom that you find in the grocery store is going to be a great addition to your broth and be really nourishing to your immune system. Yay for mushrooms, seriously, can't say enough about that. And another thing about broths is you can do everything I just said with a broth that you brought home from the grocery store shelf. So if you feel like enhancing it with herbs or mushrooms, etc., you just pour that broth into a pan on the stove and simmer it for at least 20 minutes and as long as you want, with anything that you want to add to it, for those additional immune boosting points. And if you're not someone who's into cooking soups for yourself, that's totally fine. Broth can also make a great base for cooking anything that you would put water into normally. So if you're cooking rice or even pasta, but I like to choose a grain that really starts small and then expands with the water, like rice or quinoa or cornmeal or etc. In place of the water, you can cook these things in broth. And that is a really great way, I have found personally, to sneak broth into little children who are unsuspecting. Picky eaters, it's a great way to basically trick your kid into eating a lot of broth and getting a lot of nutrients that way. Okay. Now let's move away from kitchen herbs and talk a little bit more about things that are specific to herbal medicine. I want to share a tea recipe with you, which is a tea that I like to drink basically every day, starting in the fall and all winter long. So the main ingredient in my personal favorite tea for this time of year is holy basil. And another common name that's often used is tulsi. And this herb is native in India, and it's an ancient Ayurvedic herb, and it's also pretty widely commercially available now. If you do feel moved to go order some of these more specialized herbs that I'm talking about, I recommend Mountain Rose Herbs as a source. I see them as a sustainable, ethical source for herbs, and they tend to be really high quality. So check them out if you feel moved. And holy basil is also pretty easy to find in the grocery stores. In natural grocers, you might be able to find it in bulk, or Durango Natural Foods, you definitely can. And it's also really common in commonly found herbal tea brands that come in a box full of tea bags. So like traditional medicinals and those types of brands often have Tulsi based teas or holy basil based teas. And holy basil is one of those herbs that it just addresses so many different areas of the body and really addresses our whole wellness. So it's boosting to the immune system. It also helps our digestion function like its best self, and that really is the foundation for all of our health. If we're not digesting our food, we're not getting our vitamins and minerals, and we're not getting the building blocks that our body needs to function properly. So digestion is so core and so key, and holy basil helps with that. Holy basil is a relaxing nervine, so it will help relax your nervous system and help manage that stress piece, which we know is so important. And it does that while at the same time not being sedating. So I feel like I can drink it in the middle of the day and not get sleepy. It actually helps us take up oxygen. So it helps our bodies cope with stress in that way too, and that it increases our oxygen efficiency, and it increases it in our brain as well. So it can actually be kind of clarifying to our brain and our focus. And if you're someone who's suffering from brain fog or something like that, holy basil can be really helpful in that way. So holy basil addresses this issue of immunity from so many different angles and really just supports us in a huge way. And that's why I really like to drink it every day. And I also think it's just incredibly tasty, which is the best part. It's even if you just leave it by itself, it's an incredibly tasty tea, and it's aromatic and wonderful and beautiful. So thank you, holy basil. To my holy basil tea, I like to add rose hips. Rose hips are incredibly chock full of vitamin C. They have been shown to really improve people's resilience and immune response in studies. They are the little red fruits that get made on rose bushes when the rose gets pollinated and turns into a fruit that is the rose hip. And the rose hips, you know, they can be grown domestically. They're also really abundant. If you're going to harvest your own, I really recommend waiting until after the first frost. That's when they're the most potent. This year, we're already past that first frost. And I always just, since we're talking about harvesting things, I always just like to remind students to definitely never take more than 10%, definitely know the place where you're harvesting from, have permission, make sure it hasn't been sprayed, and be respectful to the plant, because the rose hip is what contains the seeds. And that is what the plant needs to reproduce itself. Those are its babies, basically. So don't take too many, but they are a really fun thing that are accessible to us here. So I add rose hips to my tea. I add calendula to my tea for the reasons we described earlier. Calendula is another one that really also supports the digestive system. So if you're somebody who has IBS or kind of chronic digestive upset, calendula can be a really lovely ally. I add cinnamon and ginger to that tea for reasons we've already discussed. And another one that I haven't talked about yet is mallow root. When you're finding it in the store, it's often marshmallow root, which is a specific species. But there are lots of different kinds of species of mallow, and we have a really weedy one here, which is Malva neglecta. It's often also called cheeseweed. And the medicinal part I'm talking about here is the root. And the root is really cool. It is immune boosting, for one. It's immune stimulating, so helpful for immune stuff. And it's also super moist. So when you brew mallow root into a tea, it becomes slimy. And that is really helpful in the wintertime. In the wintertime, especially here in the Southwest, things get really dried out. Our tissues might get dried out. Our mucous membranes might actually not be able to make the mucus that we need them to make because they're just so chronically dried out. The vast majority of us who live here in this climate, in this region, are kind of chronically dry skin, dry hair, dry mucous membranes, et cetera, et cetera. And so mallow is such a lovely plant for this reason. It is slimy and moistening, and it literally, when you ingest it in the form of a tea, it literally just takes that moistening factor and just distributes it wherever your body needs it. It's just an overall moistener. And it's a weed here that can be kind of invasive. So I find this plant to be really magical. And the one thing to know about brewing mallow tea is that you can brew your tea hot like you would any other tea, and that would work just fine. But mallow really excels, and the moistening properties specifically really come out when it's brewed cold. So the way I like to address this issue, since I'm drinking it in tea with other herbs that don't necessarily need to be brewed cold, is I mix all my herbs together. I take, like I've said earlier, a small handful, throw it in a quart jar, cover it up with boiling water, screw a lid onto my jar, and then I wait for that jar to cool. And then I pop that jar in the fridge, and I leave that jar in the fridge overnight. Then I come back in the morning and strain my herbs out. So this tea has now had a hot and a cold treatment, and all the nice mucilaginous aspects of the mallow have really been allowed to shine, and they've really been allowed to come out. And I make it in a big batch like this so that I can pour cups off as needed. 1 cup a day, 2 cups a day, whatever you like to do. That's one way to do it. I also really like to use this tea as a base for hot cocoa. If you haven't noticed, I really, really like hot cocoa. It's like one of my favorite ways to sneak herbs into myself while it also being like a really nice sweet treat for myself. So instead of making milk the base of my hot cocoa, I'll make my herbal tea the base of my hot cocoa, and then I might add like a little dollop of cream, or if you're someone who doesn't do dairy, you could add a little coconut milk or something after that. Teas, herbal teas, are another kind of thing that you can kind of sneakily sneak into kids. I like to do it in a smoothie. Like if I'm blending up a smoothie for my kid, I will use herbal tea like this as the base instead of water or something, or milk, something like that. Okay, so let's see what time it is. Yeah, it's about time for us to wrap up here. And I just want to say thank you so much for watching this video. And if you have questions, you can find me at katehustedherbalist.com. So just to spell that out for you, that's Katehusted.com. Oh, sorry, katehustedherbalist.com. And I'll put the link below this video too, so you can easily click on it. But when you're there, sign up for my newsletter. If you liked this class, you will get, I send them out about every 2 weeks, and they are full of great content. And you will also get to know about other times that I'm teaching and other ways that you can learn from me. I have some online courses that are available all the time on my website, so go find them there, katehustedherbalist.com. And thank you so much for being here. Take care.